Hi, David.
Hi,
Welcome.
good to see you.
So great to have you as a guest on the What podcast, our sister podcast. And I would just love for you to introduce yourself, tell the audience
Right.
what's important to know about you, and then we'll get started.
Well, maybe Natalie, one of the more important things was you were one of my teachers.
Yeah,
So
yes, yeah, that was in 2020, I think, was it?
I took two courses with you. I took
Yeah.
an early one and then I took a later one, and it was wonderful. So thank you for everything that you shared and the CCA experience. It was great. I'm an organizational psychologist by training. That's my doctorate. And I've been working in the field of organizational psychology and working with organizations in the private sector and the public sector for decades. And a lot of it has been documented in the books I've written. So I've written books on the topics of human resources. Some of them became very well known, like high impact HR. I wrote on leadership, which was also received well, translated to multiple languages. Probably the best known one there is The Leadership Gap. And then the one that really went viral was a book I wrote on innovation called Innovative Intelligence. And that book got me teaching in Shanghai and in other places. So my consulting firm is built around the ideas, the research I've done, and coaching is a key component of it. So we have a team of 5 coaches who are
Mhm.
offering coaching, but also teaching how leaders in organizations could be more effective coaches, which I know is a part of the topic of today.
Yeah, I'm so, excited to dig into that with you. And actually, I just wanted to take a note. I was watching one of your keynote speeches, I think, on YouTube, and you said leaders don't need to be innovative, leaders need to lead innovation. I wonder if you
Right.
could talk to that just a little bit, and how
Well,
coaching even plays into that.
right. For many years, we find in organizations that they gave people courses and tried to develop leaders to become more innovative. But if we think about it, people who had spent 30, 40, 50 years of their life building their cognitive capacity and their approach towards issues, what's the probability in a 1 day, 2 day course you're going to rewire them to make them more innovative? So the answer to that is low. And
Mhm.
it's probably going to be very unsuccessful. Malcolm Gladwell said 10,000 hours. So, you're going to need a lot of commitment to it to become more innovative. You can get innovative leaders by hiring more innovative leaders, but to take what you have and transferring them to becoming different in the way that they process things is rather low. So, what is more important in organizations is to develop leaders of innovation. And leaders of innovation are the leaders who can draw out the innovative capacities of individuals and teams. They don't need to be the most innovative. They need to be open to hearing the other ideas and combining them to gain insight and discover innovative solutions. So it has a direct relevance to coaching, because what we found in this work was becoming leaders of innovation was probably one of the big ideas. And the second big idea was the importance of emotional intelligence for leaders of innovation. You have to have the maturity to be open to alternative ideas. You have to be willing to explore and even allow for ideas that may conflict with your own. And the more you're capable of doing that, the better you will be a leader of innovation. And coaching can help in that space.
I really love what you're saying because I completely agree with the work that I've done in organizations. And what I've been saying for many years now is that coaching or the empowerment that coaching brings to a team is the
Mhm.
birthplace of innovation, right? When
Right.
we can allow people to explore their own thinking and ideas and bring their experience and diversity to the conversation, that's when we
Mhm.
start to get innovative, right? We start to see different
Absolutely.
perspectives. So really love what you're saying on that.
There's been a lot of work in that space under the name psychological safety.
Mhm.
And the image there, many people think psychological safety is about the individual. I feel safe to be who I am. But that's really not the way it's understood and the way the research has focused it. It's more about the team's experience of being able to have psychological safety, to be included, to contribute, to even challenge the authority and not feel that they're going to be punished for it or reprimanded or shut down in any way. And the leaders who are capable of bringing out that ability, that kind of climate in the team, that psychological safety, they're the ones that are the leaders of innovation. They're the ones who have the emotional intelligence to bring out that kind of space. And in coaching, we need to be working to allow and to enable people to be like that as well.
Yeah, that's an important distinction on psychological safety. And I guess I'm curious what's come up from you as you're saying that is, what have you seen over time? You've been doing this a long time. I guess you started in HR and, you've seen a lot of how coaching has been brought into the workplace in your own practice, I'm sure. What are the changes? What do you see in organizational spaces? Like what's becoming the trend?
Well, COVID was a dramatic change for coaching in the workplace. What happened during COVID was organizations that wanted to develop leaders found that they were not confident that convening groups of leaders would be safe. And they were right. It wasn't safe. And there were effective methods of doing virtual learning. That's something which I developed. I presented innovations in virtual learning in a collective environment, but most people were very boring. They just took their material and they talked to a screen the entire time. So there are ways of making it interesting. There's ways of making it great, but most organizations did not have confidence in that. But what they did gain confidence in was coaching in this virtual format that we're in right now. This did not exist in 2019, where everybody had Teams, everybody had Zoom. It was not used frequently. There was Google Hangouts, there was, Skype, there were things, but it wasn't used as a regular process. We accelerated the utilization of this kind of technology, which allowed for remote work in a different kind of way, but it also allowed for one-to-one coaching. The other person has to keep that camera on, right? You do see the person fully. I can see you're smiling and we can engage in a meaningful conversation. And it had advantages actually over in-person on-site coaching because in some level it was more private. When I would show up at someone's office, they would say, "Who's David coming to your office all the time?" Or they'd come to my office. And actually it's clearly more efficient and convenient for everybody involved. So it became almost a choice that organizations did. And there was a dramatic acceleration of coaching that I found, at least in our firm. It became a dominant part of our firm during COVID. Now people are convening and we're seeing a shift again, where now people are getting together in groups, they're getting in person. It's changing, but there has been a retention of that coaching mindset. But what's happening for leaders, for me, so doing with a cadence of every 2 weeks or every week of coaching for an hour, wherever they are in the world, that's doable. But for a leader, that's not the way they coach. Leaders don't have a cadence. Leaders in an organization coach when they have to. Their coaching discussions, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. And it needs to have a different kind of acceleration to the process in order to be effective. So I thought that would be a really great space to do a deep dive. And I did, and I developed a model called Clear Leadership Coaching that ultimately was something that people were able to grab onto as a guidepost for how they may be able to coach in the workplace and use a number of the things that we do as coaches professionally, externally as ICF coaches, but they need to do it in a somewhat different way because of the context that they're in and how much time and the immediacy with which they have to do coaching.
I was looking at your model and I know you have this really neat infographic. Maybe you want to share it, but I wondered if you could talk us through your model. And the reason I think it's interesting, especially for our audience of coaches, is to show people what you can do with your own branding around coaching and how you can make it your own. And I really love this model. And also I can see how, just by what it stands for, how that brings in psychological safety that you're talking about into teams. So I'd love for you to walk us through that if that's okay.
Yeah, it'll be a pleasure. And in fact, even the word clear, if
Yeah.
you can use coaching to help people through their own reflections achieve further clarity on choices they want to make, then that would probably be a positive experience for the person who went through coaching. So I grabbed onto the word clear as a way to capture it, but it's really an acronym for
Mhm.
5 different words. And I could actually walk you through it. If you want, I'll go to the back of
Yeah,
the room
absolutely.
and show you what it looks like. This is just a little feature over here. So, uh, it really is 5 words that I built out here, and this is the way I would explain it. So the 5 words are context, listen, empathy, action, and respect throughout. So if you look at this, what ends up happening is that we need to understand that the leader in the organization is probably going to have about 15 minutes to coach. So how do we get all the way to some action that rapidly without the leader telling them what to do?
Mm.
Because one of the messages is this has to be an empowering experience. This isn't the moment for the leader to say, do this or do that. This is, and in fact, respect throughout will be something that I know that, the Canada Coach Academy teaches a great deal. It's, how do you make sure that if you're going to need to ask and give advice, do it in a very respectful way, ask permission, share what you want, ultimately to create the empowerment throughout the entire process. That's part of what the respect throughout is. And
Mm.
also make sure that you're dealing with the context. So the psychological safety in the workplace is a contextual issue. If it's more psychologically safe, if I feel I can come to you, I probably am coming to you at a relatively early stage if I need to chat with you. But if it's not psychologically safe, it's probably at a rather advanced stage that you might end up finding the person being willing to talk to you. So I look at this as possible 2 ways. It could be that it's the individual or the employee in this case that is actually, generating the issue and wants to talk to you about something. Again, that will be impacted by the psychological safety. But it could be also leader initiated. And both of these situations kind of capture the environment, the context that we're in, and it needs to be understood. But in both of them, I don't want the leader to be giving advice. I
Mm.
want you at the initial stage to go into a listening mode. And the listening mode is really asking, what's on your mind? And what else? How can I help? What might be an outcome that you want from this discussion? And by going into that listening mode, let's say we did that in 4 minutes of our discussion, you'll ultimately be able to have the person define the issue, even if you're the leader and you're the one who's saying, I need to talk to you. I noticed that you had a discussion and you were yelling at the other person. What happened in that story over there? Tell me about it. What happened? Turn it back to the individual. Empathy then becomes a much more elaborate process. So let's give that 7 minutes in our discussion. That's where you don't just do active listening by saying, This isn't Rogerian methodology in that sense. I need you to be active listening by helping them by asking questions that take them to a deeper level. So, for example, the person might say something like, I'm upset about that. Well, what does upset mean to you? By virtue of asking that question, you're getting the person to ultimately go to another level and they're expressing it in another way. Or if you know the person over time, you might ask, what does this situation have any relationship to the previous one? And creating time connectivity. But your questioning becomes the way for the person to surface some new ideas. So then at the end, you've got to get to the action as the leader. So let's say the final 4 minutes, And really what we try to drive is the notion of small steps. When we're dealing with emotional issues, you're likely not going to be able to have grand plans. But if, it's like during COVID, if people were able to get off the couch and just stand up, that small step maybe got them moving. Same thing is happening in coaching. This is an emotional issue. If you can get them just to move, to get mobilized, what might you be able to do in this situation? That will ultimately create some momentum where maybe they can self-propel going forward. And the respect throughout is very, very important. So it's really about them. It's their empowerment. It's their experience. It's not about you. And I tell leaders that, leaders, I want you to know there is a time for you to tell them what to do. You have performance reviews. You can delegate. You evaluate. It doesn't take that away. But for this 15-minute space, experiment with the idea of allowing the individual to express their own perspectives of things and generate their own ideas about what they might do about it. So that's the clear leadership model. And it takes you through these 5 steps. And I find that leaders get it. They understand that they have to do it within a context and show respect throughout. And they also, at the same time, have to listen. They have to demonstrate that empathy. And then ultimately, they need to get to an action. They need an outcome. Otherwise, it won't work. So that's the process that I'd like to drive. And obviously, each one of them has layer after layer after layer after layer, and self-reflection and what issue they want to work on. So it becomes the frame within which that we have been successful, even in a 2-hour learning session, to get them to start thinking in a different kind of way. One last point is it's important to note that it calms them down when I say something like, you don't need to do this all the time. There are times where you do delegate, and there are things that where you give advice. But it's in this safe space when you have that coaching discussion. In particular, I want you to be moving into clear leadership coaching. And that calms them down, because if they experience this as, I have to do it all the time, then am I never allowed to tell them what to do? It's my job. I have to tell them what to do sometimes. And the answer is, of course you do. And that's not going to change.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many good things here. First of all, thank you for that. I really appreciate how you touched on using this framework, not just to have the conversation, but also for feedback on the conversations that are being had. So I think that not only does it give a leader a framework to approach the conversation, but also to reflect on it and to mentor others on this, because it's so clear, and it's like, oh yeah, looking at empathy, looking at listening, and looking at the different stages helps a leader point to areas of feedback, which I think is really powerful. The other thing that I want to touch on too, which is what you said earlier before the model about how coaching has, become virtual, or it was through the pandemic, but also this idea, because a lot of people say to me, how do you coach? Do you coach in person? Do you coach, online? And what you said about the privacy aspect of coaching online and that confidentiality that exists, that people don't see the coach coming into the office and coming out, it's really confidential. And I think that that's something that we don't talk about enough, that this idea of, this virtual practice is really, really, I think, something that a lot of leaders and CEOs, especially, who want to remain sort of under the radar when it comes to their coaching or their own development, could be very powerful. And now my next question.
That's a really important point. It just
Yeah.
to lose that insight. There are many executives that want to do the coaching at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Before they go to work.
Yeah.
Before they go to the office, the physical office, if they're going in. And some are still working part-time remotely, so they can do it at any time. The privacy is an advantage. It's also could be a disadvantage in a way that, there are advantages to being with the person in a room and hearing their voice. So I'm starting to find now, post-COVID, with a number of executives that we're almost doing a hybrid coaching. And let's say it's a 6-month coaching agreement that we have, and the cadence is every 2 weeks, that we would ultimately do the coaching virtually for 2 months, and then we'd have an in-person coaching session, and then another 2 months virtual, and then an in-person coaching session. So we're putting it in there, and that has certain advantages. I found with a number of the executives, if I go to their office and they show me around the office, I see their space in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
I see how if they give me a tour, because sometimes they want to show off, let me show you my company. And I can do that when I'm with them, and I see the way people interact with them.
Yeah.
So it changes a dynamic, but I don't need that much of that. But just having a little bit of it, for me, gives me a broader context. And for the person being coached, they feel that, I've seen their reality a little bit more, and they appreciate that. So I'm finding that balance is working very, very nicely in the coaching environment. So it's private, but it's got a public element to it.
Yeah. And I think one of the aspects of coaching that is the most informative to the leader is the shadow coaching, which is a little bit what you're talking about in terms of seeing how people interact with the leader, being the mirror, being the witness. That gives you that opportunity, right? To then share more feedback and more reflection. The other thing I want to say about your model is I appreciate how it gives a framework for reflection on how we can improve. And one of the things that you said was, not every conversation is going to be a coaching conversation, but every conversation can have a really strong purpose. So if we reflect on conversations just in the framework, even if we didn't use it in the conversation, it's a really great way to say, well, how effective was that conversation? What could I have done better? Right. And this idea of learning from, reflecting on experiences and not just the experience itself.
That's a really important point. The more we can get leaders to, I sometimes use the word, take a helicopter view, which is to, not an airplane view, which is too high,
too high.
but, just something low enough, but they can see it. Or, if you like another image, instead of getting into the weeds, you're into the trees, or you could see the forest, but to get a perspective view, it's not only crucial for coaching and coaches to step back and think about it. I think coaches should have their own mentors to be able to talk it out. By virtue of talking about their experience, they ultimately have the ability to maybe see it a little bit different perspective. But for leaders, they need that as well. And it's important to tell leaders that, you need to retain confidentiality, but it's hard to be a coach on your own. You're dealing with situations that don't have predictable answers. These are complex challenges. These are human challenges. These are emotional issues. No one's really going to have the specific answer for that particular situation. So how do you have someone who you can talk it out with? In some organizations, we created something called group soup, which is called group supervision. Okay. And where the people who went through the training, they became peers and had this agreement of confidentiality that they'd be able to coach each other. And even if the person's not an expert beyond your level, the ability to articulate what you're thinking about, what you're struggling with, just another perspective might help you get up to that helicopter view.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about the power of people coming together to learn from each other. I love the term group soup. That's really fun. I might take that from you. And I think that the opportunity for that type of feedback from each other and learning and growing together is so powerful in an organization to create engagement and a culture of coaching and a culture, like mindset of coaching in the organization. So I'm wondering, like, so you touched a little bit on supervision there, and wondering, like, what are you seeing people, organizations, leaders, what are they coming to coaching for? What is it that they're looking for when they hire you?
So in my organization is a little bit different than many of the people who are involved in coaching. So many people who are involved in coaching are working with individuals who want coaching. My practice for decades has always been with organizations. So I have no individual who is being coached is the payer.
Okay.
There's a separation from those who are paying and those who are receiving the service. The client is clearly the person I'm coaching. That's the agreement. We have an agreement to that effect. There's confidentiality. We never betray the confidentiality. And in fact, as a psychologist, they demand as a standard whenever you are coaching someone within an organization that you have to have a written agreement to the effect that the individual is receiving the coaching of their own free will and consent. Because even if they verbally say, sure, I'm okay being coached, if in fact they get stressed or they, for some reason, complain, which could occur,
Yep.
they would say that I was doing it under duress because
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in an organization and they wanted me to get coaching. So you need to always make it very clear that they're doing it of their own free will and consent, and that they have the permission and the right to withdraw from the coaching at any time if they wish to do that. So that's part of it. So there's an agreement. It's very tight. It's not long, not too complicated. But in organizations, my company has always been working with organizations where the organization hires Weiss International. They
Yeah.
don't hire, the individual isn't paying. So the implication is quite different. Most of the organizations are sending multiple people. So it's not just one person. And so there's a regular, in some organizations, I meet with the referral individual, usually in HR, who is coordinating all of the referrals on a monthly basis. Just to say, yeah, this person's still coming, this person's still coming. It's part of the confidentiality that we're allowed to say that the person is attending the meetings. Uh, we structure the process whereby we even we even request payment where at the beginning and then after 3 months, with the idea that if a person for some reason doesn't go all the 6 months, they don't have to pay the second half. And that
Okay.
calms our clients down
Okay.
because that, instead of they got to pay everything no matter what, because some people change jobs.
Yeah.
Some people, don't want to continue. That doesn't happen frequently. But in organizations, it's very common that there's a point person who is working with you. You keep the person informed, and and you basically track it throughout the process while you're working individually with that person. And in some cases, because we have 5 coaches on our team, there are some people who want certain lived experience. So some of our coaches have lived experience of a different kind. Some people want a person who is male or female. Some people want to have an individual who is a person of color. Some
Mm.
people might want to have an indigenous coach.
Mm.
So you need to build a team that, if you want to work with corporations, that can offer different lived experience, even though I think all of us could coach anybody. uh, it accelerates the trust
Yeah.
if there's a belief in lived experience. And so you need to build a group that captures what might be what the individuals in that organization would wish to have. And so it's a complicated process. It's not, it's we're not taking people off the street who want to be coached. We're really working with the organization to build their human capacity by virtue of coaching for the individuals that they select. So coming to your question, which is why do they come to the coaching? Most of the people who are coming for coaching are at some transition state.
Mhm.
And that's why the organization wants to invest in them. Many of them might be candidates or just took on a new role. And they want the person to have someone to think through their issues, to make better choices, and hopefully accelerate their ability in that role. Some people are sent for coaching because they're struggling in an
Yeah.
area. And it might be that they're really talented, but they are lacking. They've had interpersonal issues. Maybe they had a 360 survey that showed there's real problems, and those individuals are sent for coaching. Those are trickier than the first kind. The first kind are often motivated, they're excited about it. The second kind think it's possibly punishment. You know, you're sending me
Yeah.
to someone to fix me and so on. So very quickly you have to work on building trust,
Mm.
uh, and reinforcing the point that I'm not going to tell the organization anything. They'll see it in how you interact. If you change how you interact, that's what they'll see. But you and I will just talk confidentially and work through issues to figure out what you want to do, because it's your choice. You're an adult. Make your
Yeah.
choices. The last point I wanted to make is that when we do coaching in organizations, uh, most of the time, not all, this doesn't occur for presidents, but for a lot of people, there's a three-way conversation that occurs at the early stage and a three-way conversation that occurs, let's say, at the end of the 6 months. And the three-way is with the person you're coaching, the person to whom the coach reports, and the coach. So if you would be someone who I would be coaching, Nathalie, the person you report to, you and I would attend a three-way meeting. And in that meeting, it's very important for the coach not to represent the person you're coaching, because that would be a betrayal of confidence. All you're doing in the first meeting is asking two questions. The one question is, what would you like to have as your goal for the 6 months of coaching? And the individual would say it. And the supervisor would say, well, you know what, I wouldn't mind if you also thought about this. So now we brought into the conversation a little bit of tension, because now we're hearing another voice. And that becomes helpful because we can
Mhm.
refer back to it and say, what do you want to do about that? The second question in that meeting is how you as a supervisor can support the person who's being coached. That don't rely only on the coach. How can you be able to enable the person being coached? And then the last one, after the 6 months, closes the loop. It's another three-way conversation where the two questions are, what did you gain out of the coaching? And ask the supervisor, did you notice something? It may have been attributed to the coaching, or it might have been something else. It doesn't only have to be from the coaching that the evolution might have occurred. And the second question is, what do you believe should be the going forward plan? And all you're doing in that meeting is facilitating a conversation, offering no representation, because that would breach the confidentiality. So it has a different kind of flavor than the kind of coaching that you would do if it's just straight coaching with an individual where they came in by themselves.
There's so many good things to talk about in what you just said, so it's hard to restrain myself. But if I have to focus on one thing, it would just be well, actually, a few things. It would be, thank you for bringing in contracting and the importance of that,
Fundamental.
confidentiality, and that liability piece too. Covering yourself as a coach is so important. We need to talk more about that, I think, as coaches, and really pay attention to the requirement for liability insurance. Also, just that the difference between the stakeholder and the client, the stakeholder being the person you're paying, the client being the person you're coaching, and how that relationship exists I think you did a great job just sharing a little bit about how you protect the confidentiality of the client. And that's a question we get all the time about in that organizational space. And also the different types of coaching, like coaching to improve with a promotion in sight versus coaching to keep your job or coaching as a last resort. We've had both, I've also had both of those kinds of engagements. And, quite frankly, the ones where you're coaching the people to save their jobs is not the ones that I enjoy, because
Very few
the
do.
other thing, yeah. And the other thing you touched on, which is the buy-in from the client is so important. What mindset is this person coming into the coaching with? And that has such an impact on trust and that the time it takes to build the trust, right? And I mean, I guess I'm curious to know, for me, it's one of the core competencies that the ICF puts on the table: trust and intimacy, connection. I don't think you can have coaching conversations without it, right? It's so important. So all of those things put together is about that psychological safety that you began with earlier, and creating that for the culture of the organization as well as for just the one-on-one engagement. So if you think about where you're at now, your company, you have this amazing, international company, a beautiful team. I see you're multilingual. I saw a lot of French, which I was really happy to see. And I saw that you actually hired one of our coaches from our community, Laurence Pichon.
She's fantastic.
Yeah, that's so good. So what's next for you in this realm?
Well, the coaching continues to be a very important part of what we do. The innovation part is of a different kind. So I've been fortunate to be able to travel in multiple offerings to companies. I find that there are those who try to build a company, and if they want to work with organizations, they think that the right answer is do one thing and that's all you will do. That works as long as the timing's right for that kind of service provision. But with companies, if you are limited to one, then coaching is usually something where companies will invest in it when they have the money to invest in it. And so can you offer something else? Can you build a little bit of a repertoire that allows you to move as the currents change with organizations? The easiest organization, the easiest work to get is from an existing client. If you're working with a small organization and you have one coaching client, you may not get another one. So now you got to go get another organization. I tend to work with larger organizations, so they have multiple people that can be sent. So the areas that I have written about are very much a part of what we do. So Laurence is an example of a person who actually coaches and also facilitates in French, but we have other folks who just facilitate. So I do a lot of work in the area of innovation, as I mentioned earlier. And one creative thing we've done is what we call innovation labs. And what that is organizations that are struggling with a complex challenge and they can't figure out what to do. They ask a middle level of high potential talent to come together, and they would work with me, let's say, over 3 months, both understanding how to process and work with complex issues using design thinking methodology, and then to come up with some innovative solutions that they present at the end of the 3 months to the executives. It has elements of team coaching because it's got to be their idea, but it really is following a methodology of gaining insight and discovering innovative ideas, being a leader of innovation and modeling it in the way that I would facilitate. Those are lovely projects and have real meaningful outcomes, which augment what we're doing in the coaching space. We also, I saw that you looked at one of the articles I just wrote on winning against resistance to change. So that's becoming a dominant theme now in organizations post-COVID. How do you deal with individuals who are not happy about coming back to the workplace, in the office, on site? They want to be in the workplace at home. And it becomes an issue of how do you understand it? How do you deal with those who are less vocal? And so I put together some principles and designed a learning session to help leaders understand the best practices in how they can deal with change effectively in the current context.
Mm.
So to build out, I'd really recommend build out a couple of niches in the way that you are offering rather than staying in just one area. There was a point where people said, be an expert in one thing and do that only one thing. I find that to be a very vulnerable approach.
Yeah.
I think you're not going to be flexible to when the tides change. So you need to capture both, two or three different movements, and therefore be multifaceted, which would keep the interest of the client alive.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I think that that's a really important point you're touching on again. It's this idea that, any person in any industry can become a coach. And what I love about that is that you're adding like your a multifaceted approach to your expertise that, like you said, we want to diversify and keep, our eggs in different baskets so we're not all invested in one,
Right,
especially in the markets that we're experiencing today with inflation and uncertainty. And
right,
so when I'm listening to you, what's coming to mind, first of all, I love that innovation labs. We're starting something called coaching labs in our community next year.
nice,
And it's
great,
kind of a little bit of that, bringing people together.
great.
And what I'm thinking about when you're talking is, I'd love to know because, as your expertise and you are an organizational psychologist, by education and trade as well. What do you see as the future of coaching in terms of regulation, and what is important about that for you, if anything? Like, what are you seeing are the,
Mm.
you're doing a lot of work with companies, big organizations. Regulation is something that's coming up a lot more now. What are your thoughts on that and the impact it could have?
First of all, that's a significant question. If, as a psychologist, I'm regulated
Yeah.
by the College of Psychologists. I'm a registered health service provider in Canada. There's an organization that does that, and there's associations. And what people uh, might want to understand is that an association is quite different than a college. The college is a regulatory body
Yeah.
that people could complain to, that sets standards, that has ethical standards, while an association is a peer support group for education, for development. And
Yeah.
sometimes they put them together. If we look at the human resources situation, let's say Ontario in Canada, they had a human resources professionals association, which was basically a community that got together, that learned together, and it's rather large. But in 2013, they decided to make a proposal to the government that they become a regulatory body of human resources professionals. And so they have become a regulatory
Oh,
body.
amazing.
They're an unusual one because they retain the association role and they have the regulatory role. So there are regulatory requirements and certifications. So there's a CHRP, a CHRL, a CHRE, Chief Human Resources Executive. I'm one of the Chief Human Resources Executives. There's around 270 in the province. And I'm also on the CHRE committee for the Human Resources Professional Association to assess individuals who want to become a CHRE. It's a rather elaborate process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that has done is it professionalizes the human resources function to another level. It starts saying that you have standards that you have to meet. Now, in human resources, they haven't controlled it like in medicine or in psychology, where you can't practice unless you are certified, regulated.
Mm-hmm.
But in human resources, you can still practice as a human resources professional if you choose not to become part of the regulatory process. And you
Okay.
could still call yourself a human resources professional. So it's in the middle. I think that coaching needs to also experiment with finding out how it could professionalize and have formal standards. The ICF has excellent global standards, but it's usually state by state, province by province, about what are the expectations of a coach that in some respects says if you don't have certain capabilities and meet certain standards, then maybe you're not allowed to use the word coach. So everybody is using the word coach um, whenever they want. And if everybody can use it, it doesn't carry any meaningful standards. One final point. I was just dealing with a major government body, and they had in their standard for what they call a vendor of record, which is their clearance on which vendors are allowed to be used for coaching. They said that you must be certified by the ICF and don't apply. You won't be considered if your coaches are not ICF certified. That kind of power, when the client starts demanding it, will elevate the capability of coaches and make something like a PCC, make a CCA certification, make those have even greater power and importance for the workplace.
Absolutely. I'd love to have another session just on that.
An important topic, and it's not an easy one.
No,
because it's everywhere. How many people they retire and they say they're a coach. So there's just a lot of usage of the word coach, and ICF is probably one of the few standards that are fairly reliable that people refer to, and so therefore many people are trying to get that certification.
Yeah, and I think one of the main reasons for this podcast is really to educate people on what coaching is and isn't, so that there is more credibility to the professionalism of coaching. So I appreciate that, that your thoughts on that. I'm just looking at time and I'm just seeing, I know you're busy. So what I'd like to end with.
It's a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, it was so nice to just have this time one-on-one too. What I'd like to end with though is to, let people know how they can, hear more from you every day. You have these great posts on LinkedIn. You have such a great following. I mean, I'd love for our audience to know how they can connect with you and hear more of your wisdom every day.
So during COVID, I started posting daily infographics that I found that I curated from many, many talented people. In fact, even the Clear Leadership Coaching became a infographic. This was done by Haley Lewis, one of the really outstanding. Her name is @HeyPsych. You can check her out. She's really great. So you can come and look at what I'm doing. This was on Clear Leadership Coaching, so it went viral because it was an infographic. It's those kinds of one-pagers that people seem to have time to read. So I get a lot of feedback, and initially it was just a give back, but it has become a benefit in a different way for me, which is presence. Yeah. Part of the challenge in the world that I'm in is having people know where you are and hearing from you. And by virtue of doing this, it becomes something where people are hearing from me daily. So people use it almost as their morning spark to have a thought. And I hear that a lot from people. So by all means, check it out under Dr. David Weiss, and you can find me on LinkedIn. You also, on my firm's website at weissinternational.ca, the most popular page is a page called Free Articles.
Yeah.
So I have about 60 of the articles I've written, and actually chapter books that I've written, chapters from those books that John Wiley & Sons, my publisher, has allowed me to put up on for free on the website. I learned from Marshall Goldsmith, one of our superstar coaches in the world. He said to me, David, I just want to let you know that anything you've written that's more than 1 year old has no market value unless you give it away for free. So, and he does that too. So go to
Yeah,
his site. You can
yeah.
download a ton for free. So I started putting up my articles and the chapters as free takeaways. And
Hmm.
there are people who just download some, all, and it's the most popular page on that website. It's a draw. So by all means, check it out, download stuff. There is an article on clear leadership coaching there that
Yeah,
you may want to look at. There's another article, short piece I wrote on the impact of psychological safety on coaching,
yeah.
which you may want to look at. And all those are useful. Share it with others and reach out. It's a pleasure to connect with everybody.
Yeah. And you're also a keynote speaker. So, those
Right.
opportunities as well. And I just, yeah, really appreciate your time. And I guess I'm really curious. I have to ask, what led you to Canada Coach Academy before we go?
Well, first of all, I had a wonderful experience at Canada Coach Academy. It was the purpose of going to Canada Coach Academy was the realization during COVID that coaching was going to grow and grow and grow as an area of practice for my firm because that was the offering. And so, as a psychologist, I wanted to make sure that I was as most current as possible
Mm,
in what would really be required in the workplace as a executive, as a leadership coach. And Canada Coach Academy was just a wonderful learning experience. And I had the good fortune of having Nathalie
yeah.
as my teacher who's sharing her wisdom for two of the courses. And that was really a pleasure. So I recommend Canada Coach Academy to others. It's a great offering, and congratulations on building such a wonderful organization.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Well, look, it's been such a pleasure. Again, I'd love to have you back and dig into some of those concepts a little further. But for now, just thank you for your time. And
A pleasure,
yeah, and thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
and thank you so much. It was a pleasure chatting with you.